I raise the nose a little bit.
Ah, okay.
And just hold it there. And then we wait. And when she wants to fly,
she'll fly, huh?
She'll fly.
Very smooth that way. All right.
I'm standing in front of a new airplane. Now it's an old new airplane or a new old airplane, however you want to look at that. This is the Jabiru 170D. Previously there had been a J170 SP. I flew with Katie Bozeman Karate, and she did a very nice job of showing me around the airplane a little bit. I did get to fly it for some portions of it. I gave it back to her to demonstrate some portions, because that's what we like to go do when we fly these things. As you'll see, we like to say, look, if you're checking out this airplane, you want to know what it would be like to fly it, but you're not lucky enough to be here, maybe you can come along with us and learn most of the same things. So we try and do that exactly that way. So every time I walk up to the Jabiru, I kind of think, gee, this is kind of a little airplane because I can see over it, and I'm just a guy of average height. The reality of it is that's just how it sits on the ground and whatnot. When you get inside the airplane, it is not smaller than it looks, or as small as it looks from the outside. It was actually quite comfortable. We're going to take it sort of front to rear. We'll come back to the prop in a second. In the engine, this is a Jabiru is one company of only two that I know of that makes their own engines as well as the airframes. The two engines are primarily the 2200 and the 3300. The first is a 4-cylinder, the second is a 6-cylinder. Both are air-cooled, and they both run, this is kind of an important feature, at the kind of RPMs that most pilots are used to. If you've flown Continental or Lycoming, which is overwhelmingly what GA pilots have flown, they're used to numbers like 24, 2700 RPM. This is similar, a bit higher, but not like the Rotax, and it's 5,000 plus RPM. Spinning the prop up here, or the engine spins the prop up here. This is a wood Sensenich prop with a composite covering to it. It seemed to work real well for us. There will be some other choices about that, I'm told. But anyway, coming back further on the airplane, you can see the whole thing is a very sleek-looking airplane. It's all composite, and although it's strutted, the wings are arranged on the cockpit, so as we saw when we're sitting inside the airplane, you can see out of this airplane very well. It may not look like you could because I appear big next to the airplane. That's just not true. It's very comfortable inside. Steerable nose wheel up front, wheel panted, and steerable nose wheel by rudders on both sides, but hand brake, which we kind of like, and main gear, of course. Tailplane, everything is all composite on the entire aircraft. There's a couple of things that have changed about it, but one of the things I got to mention is the fuel tanks. This has the same fuel tanks as the larger sibling, which is the J230D, formerly the J230 SP. That's 36 gallons of fuel, and in flight you heard Katie tell me that it burns 4 gallons an hour if you're modestly throttled, and you could even back it off from that, I'm guessing. That's a lot of time of sitting in the cockpit, which I personally can't handle, but they do make good use of that in South Africa, where they go up on rhino poaching missions, where they're trying to prevent that activity, of course, and they stay up 8 hours or more at a crack, Katie tells me. So that's a long time to be in this airplane, but it's capable of doing it. Further back, all the way on the tailplane is different. They used to be kind of flat, board-like surfaces, and, you know, they worked okay, but this airplane actually got it first, and then it went up to the J230 to have aerodynamic shaping. That means a slight curvature to the tail, which makes generally for better handling, and that's the result they got here as well. So the Jabiru design has been always, and still is, a Australian design, and the engines still come from there. But today, Jabiru, under the LSA rules, it's perfectly allowed and done by companies like Boeing and Airbus too, to have components built in different places. Well, how about this? Jabiru sends an engine and some metal parts and all the rest of the work, including mold building and taking pieces out of molds and putting them all together. That all happens in South Africa now, and that's one of the reasons why it's got an even better price point than it's had in the past. So that's been a nice improvement for the company. It comes into the United States without an engine, and the folks at Jabiru North America in Shelbyville, Tennessee, add the engine, wire up the panel, and make some of those customizations for customers right here in the United States. Inside the Jabiru 170D now, we're having a look at, first we're going to look at controls and some aspects of the cabin, then we'll go have a look at the panel for you. First thing, just because it's sort of big in your face here, is this U-shaped joystick. And I'm showing you just how it's shaped here since the camera's catching an edge on. But you can see there's room for, it's got this nice wide armrest here, which I really like. Both people can have their arm pinned down and hand on the stick. and that prevents you from making erratic movements, maybe in turbulence or maybe because you're a little nervous or whatever it might be, but that won't happen. You can, and because this airplane is anticipated to be used in flight schools, well, now an instructor can really sense what a student is doing very well. The student in reverse can be reassured by the instructor being right on the controls with them. So a U-shaped joystick, which I've seen both Katie and Pete Karate put their arm right in the U of the joystick, which is really comfortable, and then you can have your hand on the brake. And you can still control it that way. Now, you don't do fine control that way, but you can definitely sort of make minor adjustments. In flight, it honestly didn't take much. We had hands off a lot, and it wasn't bumpy, but there's always some movement in the sky, and airplane just wanted to fly along very nice and straight, so that's a great quality. So I mentioned that right in front of that is the brake, and you see down here this this red part that I'm pointing at here. This is the parking brake feature. Pull it back, notch that down into one of several positions. That'll hold the brakes on while you're still sitting there. Alongside the this tunnel here that contains some of that linkages is your trim, and there's one on the other side here just like that. So as I move this one here, you'll see it moves on that side as well. And it doesn't take a lot of motion either, but it does definitely relieve the forces. For example, if you're trying to hold slow flight and you got to hold the stick back, just a little bit of trim will help do that very nicely. Just a mechanical trim, not electric. So the flaps are electric, and we'll talk about that in a second too. Coming over your shoulder is this is a three-point system, so it's a shoulder belt and lap belt combination. The seats are very nice and comfortable. I understand some extra cushions that got put in here, but it certainly was nice and comfortable for me, so that was nice. And that's also a way to adjust the cabin a little bit for people of different sizes. In the back here, I'm going to reach back here. I can't even touch. I'm several inches shy of touching the rear bulkhead. So there's quite a bit of room back here. Now, this is not the same kind of volume that you've got in the J230, either SP or D series. That's the one with the third door and the voluminous back area where actually two other seats go if it's a four-seater in Australia as a kit-built airplane. That's why that particular model has such a giant back area. But this is very generous too. And especially, of course, in a flight school, you'd hardly make any use of that. But for an individual that bought this because it was modestly priced and he wanted something that was going to scoot along quite efficiently on fuel, well, you can definitely carry what you need to carry with you, of course, taking into consideration weight and balance. As you can see right behind my head here, there's a couple of holders for the headsets that just clip up right there, and all the headset connections are behind the co-pilot seat or the passenger seat, so all the wires are behind you, which is a really nice thing, rather than having that usual clutter of wires if the headsets plug in up here like is so common. So they've done some nice work on that too. Of course, right overhead here, the regular compass, the non-electronic compass, and right behind me here there's a tube that I imagine the camera can see, and that is the trim adjustment. So you can't hang on to that or use that as a get in and get out, and we couldn't clamp our camera to it, but it doesn't move very much either. There is a nice set of bulkheads here that we were able to use. Inside the aircraft, as I look around here, obviously you can see all the composite aspects to it, but this is a very, very solid feeling airplane. So now let's look forward a little bit and have a look at the panel. All right, now we're looking at the panel, and again, what's standard in the aircraft for $99,900 is the single Garmin. This is the 7-inch screen. They also make a 10-inch screen. They're both wonderful. This fits this panel very well, as you can see. And it's possible, Katie told me, to get the larger one in here, but then they'll move some of the circuit breakers and whatnot to a panel down here, something like that. So you could have the larger screen if you wanted. I found these to be quite acceptable, and especially with two of them. And like all these G3X touches, which is one of the nicest implementation of a touch screen I've found, all you have to do is touch the thing you want to affect, basically. So if you want to see more, this down here is showing RPM and oil and whatnot. If you tap that, you're going to see more about that. Now, you're not seeing any numbers here because the engine's not running. And when you do that, you get a graphical portrayal of the RPM, the tachometer. Tap it again, it goes back to this, which is what Garmin calls the safe taxi mode. And that helps you not make silly mistakes on the airport. But that's, if I tap this part up here now, that's going to show me, now it's sort of your digital six-pack, if you will. It's not literally a six-pack, but it's where all that kind of information is portrayed. But if I go back to this, and I come over here to this twist knob, and I back out far enough, as Katie instructed me, then you begin to see the whole map. In fact, now you can back it off here. You can see the whole state of Florida there. So as you zoom in, it keeps track of where you are. And now we're right back there on the runway. And so if you came to this airport and you went, well, they told me to go taxiway Bravo, then Delta, well, you can figure all that out on that screen. It's another one of the nice features. One more thing I want to show you about this touch screen that's nice because, okay, where do you adjust the radio here? It's got a radio, but where do you adjust it? Well, you see the frequencies up here, COM and standby. Of course, that just, if I touch COM, they'll reverse. So that's that flip-flop switch like some others have, but that's all they do. So now, as I was properly instructed, if you touch on standby, there we go. Now I can adjust it. And look how easy that is to adjust versus that twiddling the big knob and then the little knob. And you just try and do all that sometime when you're on an IFR approach. Not that you might do that in this airplane, but anyway, this makes it a lot easier. All your controls are right there, and then another tap, and that goes away, and it's back to where you were. These can be, if you were just a solo pilot and you had both screens, you could have your aviation, your ADAHAR system over here, and your map there, or engine indications over here, and map here, whatever you want. You can switch them back and forth as you like. Very nice. So now let's look at back to the basic controls. Right above my hand here is the throttle, and there's one on the other side in the same position. And right above that, the push-to-talk button, which when you're operating, at least most people I know, and certainly when I'm flying anywhere near the pattern, I have my hand physically on the throttle at all times. So the push-to-talk is right there. It's very easy to reach. If you're up at altitude, well, you're going to have your throttle set. Well, then just rest your hand on it, and you can touch the push-to-talk as you need. Right above that is flaps. And again, both the push-to-talk and the flaps are replicated on both sides. So very handy. While your inside hand, whichever seat you're in, is on the joystick, your outside hand is operating flaps, push-to-talk, and throttle. Very nice arrangement. Here in the center, besides some other switches about nav lights, strobe lights, landing, taxi, and so on, and it's got the wig-wag option I see, which flips your landing lights back and forth to make kind of like a strobe. Below that, we have carb heat, choke, cabin heat. Don't need any of that down here in Florida, but up north, that'd be real handy. An hour meter, and the rest of it is some circuit breakers, and that's pretty much it. So a lot of the work on the panel is being done by this Garmin G3X Touch, and otherwise this airplane has got virtually everything you need. One more thing to point out here as I reach for the door. The doors are, I assume you can see that over my leg here, and that's they're nicely, again, all composite, little armrest down here, your handle that pulls to get you in and out, and once this is pulled in all the way, then you've got a secondary latch that goes up here, and it's bright red so you can kind of see it because you could maybe bump that or something, so it's red to be visible, I'm sure. Anyway, that makes sure this door is nice and secured for you. And you've got a nice air vent system up here. These are common on airplanes, but my experience was that brought in a lot of air. We actually closed it down some, even flying on a day that was 80 degrees, so clearly it lets in enough air. And I'm going to put the air conditioning back on here now by opening the windows, or opening the door. Nice little strap on it here so it doesn't blow open. You see how far it goes. That makes it easy to get in and out, but of course if the wind was behind you and it didn't have that strap on it, you might damage a hinge or something like that. So they thought it over pretty well. One last thing down here, a little stash pocket for things you need in flight. Of course your cell phone and other things that pilots don't use in flight but sure like to have handy. But let me talk a little bit about speeds. We did an upwind and a downwind run to find average cruise speed using indicated, but doing up and down wind and checking that against ground speed. North of 100 knots. We saw 103, 105. That kind of depends on where you have the throttle set, of course. More gas, more speed, less gas, less speed, but a nice little cruiser. Not as fast as the 230, which runs right at 120 knots. But plenty fast enough for regional flying within the United States easily, or all the way across the country if you got a bit more time. So we also did a series of stalls in it I mentioned, and looking at the indicated airspeed on the Garmin's, I was seeing numbers that matched what's in the brochure. The brochure calls off 45 knots with flaps up. We didn't actually do stalls with flaps up, we had flaps down. So we were seeing numbers that were down closer to the 40 number. We began to see a little bit of wavering and whatnot at 47, 48 knots, and then by the time the horn was going off, matched the numbers which are required by the ASTM program. A couple other facts I think might be of interest to you. Empty weight 748 pounds, and of course it grosses out at 1320 like all these do, so that's a pretty decent useful load there. We saw climb rates north of 500 feet per minute, and we weren't trying real hard. We were mostly doing en route cruise, which I believe was in the low 80s is where we normally had it. It was a little more, always a certain number when Katie flew it. When I flew it, I varied a little bit, but that's novice error is all that is. And a never speed of 140 knots, so it's got a lot of room over its typical cruise speed. The brochure lists 100 knots at 75% power. Obviously, if you get up higher, you'll see a higher true airspeed indication. It's good in crosswinds. It's got lots of roll control to it, and the elevator and tailplane provide good controls. No problem in, say, 10 or 12 knots of pretty significant cross, and if you're experienced, you can do 20 knots at significant cross. The airplane has the capability of handling. So in flight, behind the 2200, I had a good noise canceling headset from Lightspeed on, so it did do some of that work for me, but the engine felt smooth and made no noises that I could discover. I mean, I could obviously hear it, but it sounded great the whole time, and my experience with Jabiru's on several flights now has always been very, very smooth running. And some people would say, well, yeah, that's true of the 6-cylinder, and my experience today says, no, it's also true of the 4-cylinder. Okay, so more information about the airplane.